Please join me in welcoming Rebecca Davis.
That was a wonderful introduction. Thank you. There's a lot that I'd like to be able to cover today just in terms of my inspiration, my process of making this work, and the things that I'm excited about with it. I thought as a beginning, because there is that whole aspect for me of making it, but in the end, it's getting work out to the public, having a chance for work to be seen by you, my viewers, that I thought we'd start, instead of looking at the technical aspects of the work, to start with the heart and soul of an exhibition. And so for me to start my talk, I'm going to ask if there's any of you who would like to share what your reaction was to come into this space and view this work. Okay, somebody.
Yeah, hi. I'm a student here, and when I first came in, first of all, I loved it. It was beautiful. But I thought, wow, why didn't I think of it? Why we could all have thought of doing something with charcoal or pencil in this way. But then I found myself just getting more and more drawn into it. You have texture. I mean, it's just amazing. It brought a lot into my mind, and I just love the way, I don't even know how you did it, really, how you were able to make all these beautiful arcs and how they intertwine, and just seem to kind of go in and in and in. And that meant a different a feel or depth to it that I had for experience and really enjoyed it. And even brought me back to like spirograph and my childhood.
That's great. Yeah, wonderful perspective of it. Anybody else? Yeah.
I'm a weaver, and I walked in this room and I thought, wow, this is fiber. I can relate to this. But then I heard somebody else and they said, this is a sculptor, and somebody else, this is printmaking. And you seem to hit something common that it is all, even we're from different disciplines, but it is all in some way. Carol.
I noticed that there was a duality to the experience. My experience of the art, one was the serenity and the purity of the forms from a distance, but then getting up close, there was this wildness of the line, almost on the edge of out of control. And I really like the contrast between those two parts of my experience.
Yeah. Great.
I experienced something similar. But for me, it was like from chaos to order. I mean, the further you go into the form, the more orderly it is. And almost like iron filings with magnet, too. I mean, when you can lead the magnet around and make different designs.
Yeah. So again, another experience from childhood or direct experience with material. Yeah. Judy?
Two other reactions. One, the title of the dancing graphite seems so appropriate. These fibers or filings and whatever is definitely dancing around. And my other reaction was that some of the vertical pieces remind me of your work with the stones that you and Roger had done with different stones from different places along the road or places along a river. It's a different colors of the graphite reminded me of those panels that you and Roger did with stones.
Yeah. Carol?
When I first saw some of the smaller ones before this show, I was, speaking of being reminded of other work, I was reminded of your columns of compressed vegetable matter, pine needles and stuff like that. So when I came in here and saw these huge ones in which the outside lines that were so strict to begin with have been broken up and danced through the center of all of the material, it was quite thrilling.
You?
Well, I didn't walk in and see it, as a whole. I got to see it come together and be created as a room, as an installation. And I think that's something that not all two-dimensional artists are aware of is the entire space. And you created the installation in working with each piece as it related to the others within the space. So it's a very three-dimensional approach to creating a space with two-dimensional work. And that's different for a lot of times a two-dimensional artist, which you're a crossover artist, I guess I could say, will just come in and drop off the pieces and not really think that much about the entire space.
You know, a lot of the things that you've all brought up are things that I'd like to be able to expand on a little bit as we go along, and you know, are just great perceptions of the show. I appreciate it very much. I thought I'd take just a minute also for our viewers that are watching this on the tape and people who may not have come in to see the show, to just go through, you know, just the basics of what you see without so much of the heart and soul part of it. Just, you know, what is it that's here? So the first thing that I would say is that these are works that are two-dimensional. This is two-dimensional work on paper. What are here are some works that are done with pencil. There's a work on whatever side that is, and a work over here that are pencil. And the pencil work is, you know, pencils are real hard, so you get a real fine line and a lot of detail in the scribbled line. There's other work that's done in charcoal. What I liked about the charcoal was this pure black. So the piece behind me is done with charcoal. You get this intensity of black. A little broader line, so you don't get the delicacy, but you get that broad stroke and the deep color. There's two pieces in this show that are Conte crayon that are red, that are over by the entrance, and so are sort of like working with the charcoal, but they have a little bit of wax in the pencil, and so it's feels a little different when you're working with it. But again, kind of a broader stroke, and just a little bit different to work with color, even though it's all monotone. In all of these works, there's a process of layering these random scribbled marks so that, you know, the darker areas are just more layers of scribbling, the lighter areas are less. Each of the works has kind of a frame, you know, almost like in sculpture you'd have an underlying frame to put your clay on, or plaster or something. That, for me, the lines that are rectangles, circles, parallel lines, arcs, are a framework for this random energetic scribble to attach to and play against. So that's an element that you see in each of these drawings. In each of them, too, there's one of the people had talked about the difference between the inside of the work and the edges, and that along with layering and having it get gradually darker, you move from this randomness to what becomes structure. I mean, it looks like something more structured, something more woven. And then the edges are different because they remain that kind of loose, free, light, energetic line. So those are things that are common through the pieces in this show. And then these pieces are also abstract. And in that sense, they are not meant to represent anything in particular. But they are abstract in the sense that I get excited about abstract art, which is that you're dealing with a very direct experience with the materials. It's not lacking in anything. If anything, it's giving of its form and energy and texture to give you sort of a raw experience. So those are things that I see as just being the basics of what, you know, are kind of the limitations or what holds all these different pieces together in this show. And I thought I'd move from that to just talking about some of the things that I felt excited about in making this, which is very much a reflection of the comments that you have made yourselves about your experiences in coming in. So, you know, it's kind of from my side of it, some of the same feelings, same elements. I came to this work from being an environmental artist, doing minimal presentations with sands and gravels and stripped sticks and so basically wood and stone, trying to do just enough to these materials to kind of present them and let their own essence be what came out. And during the years that Roger and I worked on that body of work, I always was exploring what I was seeing and trying to imagine how that approach might translate into a different medium. And I became interested in the thought of working with pencil and, you know, what would happen if you just, you know, instead of trying to create still life or a figure, just got up there and made marks on a piece of paper, and, you know, what would that be like? And also in the back of my mind and part of my experience was having watched my oldest son when he was about 3. We gave him a giant piece of cardboard and a big box of oil pastels or crayons or something, and he spent what I think was probably 2 months scribbling on this piece of cardboard, and he would just go at it, and then he'd pick another color and go at it, until it was just layer upon layer of this energetic thing. It wasn't like what I'm doing. It was more back and forth kind of thing. But I always had this feeling like, I want to do that. So in my own way, this was my chance to go back to that 3-year-old kid and pick up my pencil and just do that. And so there was enough happening in this process for me, obviously, to pursue it, you know, to multiple pieces. And what I loved is, like, it's always, I feel like I'm just sort of doing my job to get the rectangle on or the circle or the arc. You know, I get that done, and then I get to, you know, start in on these lines. And the process for me is always joyous. You know, it's like to be able to take these pencils and just start letting them move. And that's the process part of it for me. But then as an artist visually looking at the results, it was a process of discovery to me to find out that if you do this random stuff and you put down enough layers, that in fact all of a sudden it looks like it's becoming a weaving or a cocoon-like fiber, or, you know, that there's something happening in that chaos to order process. And it was always fascinating to me to move, you know, it's like, you know, to overlay some, you start to get a little bit of structure, and the more you overlay, you get more structure. And I liked the difference between the inner parts and the playfulness that stayed at the edges. It's like where the edges are just that initial free movement. So I was pleased to discover that, and be able to explore that through this work. I also liked that even in the darkest of pieces, in this process of random, it's totally random movements, angles, squiggles, it's like it's pretty, I can't say unconscious, but semi-conscious. It's like anytime I try to think about, okay, I want to do a circle here, it doesn't work. It has to be this real fast and loose thing. But in the process of, layering and layering and layering, you never totally cover up the black. Actually, there's, like the center of the target is totally covered up. So there are a few pieces where I just kept going. But I like the fact that the energy of the line became the energy of the space as well. It's like that energy never quite would get lost or get too heavy, so that there's an element of weightlessness to a lot of this form, even when it's intensely dark. So that was something that excited me quite a bit. And I really like too that these pieces have that balance between, I guess this is what you were talking about, Carol, the balance between meditative state and play, and that each piece has both of those elements, and that they can live side by side. I liked the opportunity to work on a large scale. I started out this series doing the pieces that are framed, so working much smaller, and in some ways those functioned like, I don't know, sketches or, an etude sort of thing, where I could play, I could experiment. And then to be able to move into, large pieces of paper and do pieces that could impact a total space so that you can view it from quite a distance. It's like they work from a distance, but then you also get drawn in, to where you can be right in front of them and still be intrigued or pulled into what's happening with the line in the piece. And I really enjoyed working that way as well, to be able to work on large scale. And with that, kind of some of the things that Edie was talking about, probably because as a sculptor, I've had exhibitions in museums and art centers where my work takes up the entire space, and so you have to think about the space as a whole. So you think about verticals and horizontals and lights and darks. And so in the process of creating this work, part of it was thinking about the creation of this space, the creation of the experience I wanted my viewer to have walking into the space and experiencing the work as a whole. So some of the choices that I made about sizes or densities also had to do with how it would work within the space. So that's some of just sort of the heart and soul, I guess, of where I've come from on this work. I guess I'll just open it up. If anybody has questions, I would welcome them. I have some slides that I will show you that kind of go through a little bit of work that I've done in the past that kind of gives you a little background to how I got to this stuff, or pieces that relate to this. But I thought we might want to talk a little bit about how the work is made, or things like that. But anyway, I'll just open it up at the moment if anybody has particular questions.
One other question. When ladies tack these up, which adds a third dimension to it, because the paper moves away from the wall.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if you, in that one over there in the corner, is there some undulation in that? I'm wondering if you've ever exhibited it or tried it at home to undulate the paper.
you know, when he's pointing out the way these are hung, you know, where they have, what it is a little felt pad with a brad through it. So instead of being matted down, the paper does become an element where it curls a little bit at the edges, and just the way, you know, some of it will undulate a little bit down the wall. And that was a very conscious choice in the way I created these pieces. And initially, when Edie came to my studio and we talked about this exhibition, I was beginning to think about doing three-dimensional work, and have done some. And in the end, I guess to maintain, it's like in the end, part of my choice of the pieces that came into the show versus the ones that didn't had to do with whether it fit that kind of meditative state, you know, whether it could be playful and meditative. And some of the three-dimensional pieces, I think there is room for what you're talking about, you know, a little bit of undulation, letting it roll a little at the top, things like that. But I found that, at least at this point in my exploration of the material, as soon as I started like twisting the paper and, you know, or tearing it and folding it over this way or curling it that way, that it became about the paper, and the drawing part seemed like wallpaper. It seemed to totally disappear and be secondary to it. And I think that it would be possible to do it where both, you know, had kind of equal play in it, but at the moment, that's not the effect that I've had. So it's something I can explore, but at this point have kind of set aside.
And generally you stayed away from diagonals, except for a couple of examples of a lot of diagonals. Would you comment on that?
Yeah.
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, he's asking why I've stayed away from diagonals, except for, you know, a couple of the pieces. And the reason for that is kind of like I was talking about with using paper three-dimensionally, is that the diagonals immediately command your attention. It's like that's where your vision goes, is to the diagonal movements. And I've enjoyed it in the pieces that I put it in. But in the other ones, the geometry stays more in the background. It just becomes something that you don't necessarily think about, so that the freedom of the line becomes the more important element. And so that's how I chose that. Yeah.
Rebecca, this might sound like a really goofy question, but how do you know inside yourself when you feel your piece is complete? So you're working with this type of medium. I mean, you know what I mean? You can stand back and look at it and say, okay, well, this is lighter, and you know the value difference. But how do you know inside you that this is it? And that might stand just for like installation that you look at, art installation.
Yeah. Her question is, how do I know when the work is complete? And that's a hard question. It is a hard question to.
Sometimes you can overwork something.
Oh, you do. And I have pieces that go in the wastebasket when they're overworked. So, you know, sometimes it goes over. But then the question is still, how did I decide that that piece was overworked? And I think that those are the kinds of things that you come to yourself as an artist. You know, it's like you do stand back and look at it and say, yeah, I like the relationships of, you know, these parts of it. And, you know, I feel like, you know, I've got too much dark and shadow on this, and I really don't want it to be that, you know, figurative or something. So I'm going to even it out a little bit. So you just constantly stand back and, you know, do a mental choice. You know, should I push it a little further? Is it time to stop? And I think a lot of that comes from art experience. You know, the more you do art, you know, the more that feeds into the judgments of when you stop or when you continue, and also just the vision that you have at the beginning. You know, it's like I envision these pieces, and in my brain, I know when my hand has reached that vision. And she was also saying that it would be like hanging the show, and those same choices go on to set up an exhibition. You know, it's like installing a Zen garden, I think, where we put up the panels, and then like initially this panel was connected with that panel, and so there's this. You stand back and you say, nope, we've got to separate this out and give it, you know, push this way 3 inches, and you know, the middle panel actually was over something like 6 inches. And it's like, okay, that panel's got to move 6 inches. and when you do those little adjustments, you know, in height and distance, then everything finally breathes together. And so those are decisions in installing a show as well as in each individual piece. It's like little adjustments that are like, this adds to it or this takes away from it. Just a second, Kathy.
Yes, I have a pretty technical question. Do you use fixatives, or do you prepare the paper in a particular way? Because I know graphite smears, and of course charcoal does. How do you keep it so clear?
Yeah, she's asking whether I use fixatives and how I keep it so unsmudged, basically, and clear. And I don't do anything initially to prepare the paper. You know, as I'm working, you just never let your hand touch the paper. You know, the pencil or the charcoal touches, but you don't rest your hand down ever. And then in the end, some of these pieces are fixed and some of them are not. And what I found is that I would, particularly with the charcoal, I would get this wonderful dark black, and then I would put fixative on it and it would become dull. Or I would put a shiny fixative on it and it would just look reflective. And so there's certain pieces that I just decided I'll take the risk and let them be the pure. I wanted you to have the experience of that pure charcoal. I think that at the point where these pieces, you know, if they become part of a permanent collection, or I will fix them, and they probably will go behind glass at that point. But I really chose not to put them behind glass so that you would, again, just have that immediate experience with the material.
Does the paper have a finish on it? What kind of paper?
I can pass around some examples.
Thank you.
What I like is a really smooth surface because, well, there's one piece around the other side of that panel that's done on a charcoal paper that's very textured. And that piece, with its texture, works very well from a distance, but it loses something of the detail when you're up close. So for most of these, it was a search for me for paper that is absolutely as smooth as I can get it. And then also having to find a surface to draw on that doesn't have texture. And as soon as you've got texture, you pick up the little paint blobs or, you know, Mars in the table. So I had to be very careful with that. So what I'll do is pass around. This is just a Strathmore drawing paper that's in a pad that's 24 by 18 inches. That's a medium 400 series. This is what the framed work is on. This paper is a heavy duty. This is a Strathmore that comes 42 inches wide by 15 yards long, and it's a heavy paper that when you're unrolling it, it's sort of like wrestling an alligator to try to get it to lay flat and not get wrinkles in it and stuff like that, but is great to work on good hard surface. So I'll pass these just pass them along, feel what they feel like. And then the other thing that I have is just a little bag of some pencils and a charcoal pencil and a Conte crayon that are just samples of the pencils that I've used. I almost brought in, I have a little origami box that I made that every pencil that I use it till it's this much left. And then I throw it in this little origami, black origami box. And I almost brought that in to let you scrounge through and see all the pencils. But I didn't. Okay, Kathy.
My question was going to be about the pencils. When I look at the pieces, the line looks so fine. Did you have to spend a lot of time sharpening?
A lot of time sharpening. I have one of those little silver hand sharpeners. So I'm just, and you get more tendonitis sharpening than you do. But the charcoal, I use a knife and just sharpen, and let it be more broad. If you use different angles, you still get a fairly sharp line. Let's see, third row back.
I have a question regarding the forms that you choose in this overall design. Do you usually stay with it, or as you're creating, do you sometimes come in, develop it into something entirely different from what you originally imagined, or do you stay pretty much to?
I stay pretty much to what I've envisioned. Yeah, there is definitely some of that in terms of the light and dark, or how far outside the edge I'll go, how much I want it to maintain the rectangle, or how much I want it to push off of it. But for the most part, it's kind of what's in my head.
And also, one other short question. How long did this piece behind you take?
That's my most frequently asked question with all of this work is how long did it take? It's got to have taken a lot of time. And it does take a lot of time, and I can't tell you because I don't keep track. And once it's done, it's like a blur. I have no idea. And I figure it's just as well because it leaves it to your imagination as to how much time. It's somewhere between a lot of hours, but not a lot of weeks. And
Thank you.
Yeah. Do you work on these large pieces standing up vertically, or do you have them on it?
Yeah, not an easel. Don't work on an easel. And it's varied piece by piece. One of the first ones I did was the target, the big target, 6.5 by 6.5 feet. And I have a studio. We have two studios. One that's kind of a carport, enclosed carport or garage size. We've been able to create some nice big wall space and have room to work in. And then I have my drawing studio, which is about from, this end panel to me over. So it's a small space, and it has a workbench along one wall that's 30 inches wide. And, it's against the wall, so I can't even get around to the back side of it. And then I have a wall big enough for an 8-foot tall wall. So the first pieces I did, like the target, I started out putting it up on the big wall and drawing the circles as a whole. And with that piece, all three sections were taped together to do the circles. And so I left it taped together and rolled it up from the bottom and laid it on my table and worked on this, where I had 1.5 feet to working on a table. And so I'd scroll it up at the top and, unscroll it at the bottom and keep working along. This piece I did on the wall. I got a 4x8 sheet of masonite and drilled it to my wall so I'd have a cleaner surface. This is bigger than a 4x8 sheet, so every time I needed to move to a different part of the drawing, I had to move the drawing over onto the 4x8 sheet. So for me, it just comes from years of working with sculpture and not yet being quite set up to do, drawings this way. But it's worked for me. There would be ways to do it. Kirsten.
There must be millions of scribbles in this room on these papers, and I was just wondering if you have a relationship with one particular one, or if you feel like you placed one very consciously.
No. Just wondering if I have a conscious relation to any particular scribble. But yeah, there's just masses of them, so. Okay, we just have a few minutes left, and I would like to go through, I have just a few slides. I'm not going to talk about them very much, but what I included them in for, they're just a very brief kind of glance at my background in sculpture leading to this point. And the things that I would have you look for in them are elements that are common to this work. So some of the things that you'll see will be things that are kind of amorphous forms. You'll see things that are woven or lashed together that took an endless amount of time to create. And you'll see things in the environmental work where there's, particularly the sand pieces where there's gradations, this kind of minimal presentation of raw material. So that's kind of what we'll be looking for. So these are pieces, this isn't the beginning of my career, but early on I was doing these woven sort of basket-like figure, and they all have titles like spirit figure, and this is seagrass, rags, and wax linen thread. This piece is about 7 feet tall. So this is where the weavers can appreciate. One thing that I know about the work that I do is that it's not technically like way out there, but that I can kind of out patience or out tedium any of you. With the exception of maybe weavers. I think they can probably sit in one place and do things longer than anybody else. So these are woven pieces. And again, this sense of amorphous form, a lot of texture, a lot of attention to the surface. And this one is an unraveled sisal rope, also with rags and woven together with wax linen thread. Then I moved into a series of lashed stick pieces. So this is a stripped willow. Each of these pieces had a stone, just not a precious gem, just kind of maybe a rounded little river stone or something at the center of each of these pieces. And these are also lashed or pegged with little pegs. That's a different angle of the same piece that you saw at the beginning, and another angle. I'm afraid to be the one to focus, because obviously, thank you. Edie, if you just focus on that would be great. Yeah, maybe it's an out of focus slide. So this is one of those, it's like take an idea and then spend many hours. This is about a 7 foot tall piece and just lots and lots of sticks. And I included these, the two pieces that are the Conte crayon, the reddish pieces, are a little different in that they're more more designy and more like wishing wells, or there's some sense of more object-like sense to them, and which these pieces I feel like relate to. So both the woven pieces at the beginning, and there was a series here that I called ghost pieces. And I don't know why, but I've always been drawn to these, you know, almost figure-like amorphous forms. You know, it's like the sense of, you know, spirit or something that is a little hard to grasp, but you kind of know is there. And then I have a few slides that are from the work that Roger Ase and I did together as collaborative artists. Roger is also a sculptor and had a significant background in art. And at this point, we joined forces. And this is the work where we really began to focus specifically on the material. It's like not try to make it into something other than what it is, but to do just enough to it, to pare down to the essence. So this is an installation from the Coconino Center in Flagstaff, and it shows in the back some aspen poles where we just stripped the bark off and sanded it and presented it in this simple manner, leaning against the wall. And in the foreground is a piece from near Granite Mountain, taking a cut across a wash and sifting all the material through a gradation of screens, and then putting that gradated material in piles. This is a circle done on the Verdi River. This is Solstice Circle, Verdi River, separating the color of the stone, which you can see generally your eye takes all this color and neutralizes it, but we began to separate out the colors and put them in the arms of the circle. So here, you know, I include these works because you begin to see the elements of gradation, the use of circle, rectangles. So this was another piece from the Verdi River. This is called Verdi River Stones Separated. So again, just taking the four basic colors that we found in the stone in the Verdi River and separating them by color and by size. So this piece goes through this type of gradation. You know, really get the feel of the color and the texture of the material. This is a sand spiral from sand going through the Navajo reservation that's just incredibly fine. It's just unbelievably wonderful sand. And then just doing a very simple spiral through it. Some of the wood pieces, this is a piece called Aspen Stack. Again, just using simple geometry, but then letting the random nature of the wood be sort of playful within it. And that was hard to see. I chose a sunrise picture of this piece, which you can't see because it's not dark enough in here. But this is a spiral of stone from near Beaver Creek. It also goes through a gradation. That's the version of it that went into a show in a museum. And this one, which is also kind of hard to see, but I felt like particularly related to this work, is oak that goes from bigger branches at the bottom to just little tiny twigs at the top. And it's kind of a nest form, so it's actually open at the top and goes down about a foot with a bowl shape at the top. And that's a detail of it. Which, again,
all those sticks are wired together to each other, and it took her 3 months to make it. She doesn't remember.
Oh, yeah. Here's the person who can tell you how long these pieces take. And this piece was one we did that's called Arizona River Series. So each of the sculpture stands has material from a different Arizona river. And again, going through a gradation of material, which brings out the differences of color, texture, different feel. These are elm branches, inverted elm branches. And these, again, are pieces I felt related closely to what I was doing with the drawing. We did a series of piles of sticks. This one happens to be Ocotillo. And another sunrise or sunset picture, so it's not as bright as I could have chosen. And then looking down on it in a museum setting. This is Kings Canyon outside of Tucson. And again, just taking the stone from the wash and separating it out so that the colors become more vivid. And this one is harder to see, but this is cast earth. This is taking a walk through the Prescott Forest and gathering the materials. And I'm looking at Carol because I just went down in front of her house about 3 days ago and scraped up all of the Ponderosa stuff in front of her house so I can use it in art. But anyway, each of the cubes is, a different mountain mahogany or silk tassel or a different plant from our forest. But that kind of texture, surface, that kind of sparkly quality that I feel like has a relationship to the line in these drawings. That last one was desert material. And like the aspen stack, this is, this kind of crisscrossed wood, only doing it as a sphere. In this case, this is saguaro ribs. This is another, this is a smaller piece that's the Salt River, again, separated by color, separated by size. This is an installation that shows a leaf piece in the background, a sand piece in the foreground. The leaf piece is cottonwood. In the foreground, it's from the Pecos River. So, that kind of led to me doing the target. Detail of the out-of-focus detail slightly. Another detail of the leaves on the wall piece. Another sphere. This is the Pecos River piece. And how, it's like by separating it out, sifting it by size, it ends up going through these shifts in color. Another pile of sticks. This is all just weathered wood. That's a detail looking straight down at it. In the museum setting, we sanded, percentage of the weathered stuff so that there was some golden pieces mixed in. This is from Big Bug Creek, and it's a little hard to tell in the slide, but the end of each piece kind of shifts off into different colors. And then this is the last slide, which is just raking sand along the Pecos River. So the elements of geometry that were before I've continued on in this work. So any last minute questions before we end? Carol?
Can you talk about the future? And I see this integrating with your environmental sculpture work.
Well, I have still been collecting material. I've really been focused on this work for the last couple of years, and have still collected materials to continue the environment, the natural material stuff. So I see myself doing a bit of both, and it will just evolve. Anything else? Okay. Well, thank you. I appreciate it very much.